Welcome back again. You're watching World Talks and I'm your host, Claudia Czerwinska. U.S. President Donald Trump said that there is a very good chance of Russia and Ukraine joining the U.S. for a summit that could potentially lead to a cessation in hostilities. Trump's statement came just hours following his envoy Steve Witkoff's talks with Vladimir Putin, which the Kremlin described as useful and constructive. Stefan Korshak, senior defense correspondent at the Kyiv Post, joins me now to talk about the fallout of the meeting and what's to come in regards to the meeting between Ukraine, U.S. and Russia. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
So, Trump meeting Putin and Zelenskyy. Do you think this meeting is actually possible? Is it going to take place? And when should we expect it?
Well, the initial Ukrainian media reaction has been very guarded. The answer to your question is certainly it's possible. The feedback that you get from the sources here is that it might take place next week. It might not. It could take place later on this month. It's not at all clear what might be discussed or decided. It's just being taken here as another possible development that really doesn't have any direct and immediate influence on the war, but we'll see.
Well, after the meeting Witkoff-Putin, we've heard an official announcement by the White House stating that the sanctions on Russia are going to be implemented. Do you think that this strategy might be actually working because we hear about this meeting that could potentially take place, or it's way too early to assess?
Well, it's really more a question of timelines. Certainly, from the Ukrainian point of view, any sanction on Russia is useful. Enough sanctions on Russia should be able to bring the Russian economy to its knees. The question is whether or not there's will abroad to invoke those sanctions. Clearly, there's not. And there's no expectation that whatever sanctions the Americans might put into effect shortly would have a quick effect on Russia. That being said, it's very well understood in Ukraine that the sanctions have caused major damage to the Russian economy. And more importantly, for Ukraine, it's limiting, to some extent, the ability of Russia to prosecute a war against Ukraine. It's more difficult for Russia to get high-tech components. It's more difficult for Russia to get support. So from the Ukrainian point of view, any sanctions on Russia are considered a positive, but absolutely not a silver bullet that might change things overnight.
We've seen in the weeks and months past previous attempts at having this sort of a meeting between all three sides, but they were unsuccessful. Do you think that Vladimir Putin would actually sit down to the negotiating table with Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelenskyy?
Well, that would I think it's possible. If Putin and his advisors saw a benefit from it, if they thought that the simple fact of a sit-down might delay U.S. sanctions or perhaps help skew U.S. policy more towards Russia, then certainly they would consider it as a tactical move. The Russians, however, have been very consistent, led by Putin, that they are a hard line. They are not going to make concessions. They want to annex and take over about a quarter of Ukrainian territory. They're willing to fight a war to achieve those ends. They're willing to get a very large number of men killed and wounded in that attempt. The Ukrainians have the view that they can stop the Russians over time, but it's going to take a long time. So whether or not Putin or Trump meet well, Putin might consider it certainly, but from the Ukrainian point of view, probably it's not going to change anything regarding overall Russian policy towards Ukraine. That would be the feeling here.
Well, according to a Gallup poll, which was published on Thursday, a majority of Ukrainians, 70%, want a negotiated peace agreement as soon as possible. Another 25% are of the opinion that under no circumstance Ukraine is supposed to give up its territory, negotiate peace agreement with Russia on their terms. So how do you think Ukraine is going to approach this subject? Because we hear that from the society. On the other hand, we have the government, we have external forces, we have President Trump, who is pushing for those negotiations. Where do you think Ukraine is going to find itself if such meeting is going to take place?
Well, the very short answer is that Ukrainian society itself hasn't decided fully, and it's a very murky question. What are negotiations? What would be acceptable to give up? What would be acceptable? What it would be unacceptable? I think that there's a general view that I think it's very clear that few in Ukraine believe that Russia simply can be defeated. Um, there are many who think that Russia can be outlasted. There are many who think that negotiations, perhaps leading to a ceasefire, but not an end to formal hostilities, for instance, similar to the North Korea, South Korea situation, would be an acceptable outcome. Negotiations leading to a ceasefire are not necessarily the same thing as negotiations leading to the cession, I should say, of major portions of territory. And the answer is that the Ukrainian government doesn't really have a clear view on that, nor does the society. So they just look forward and keep fighting.
As we've seen before, a lot is going to depend if those talks are going to take place. A lot is going to depend on President Trump and on the U.S. administration. From your perspective, from what you've seen so far, what would you say is the Ukrainian side? What is the Ukrainian population thinking about Donald Trump? Do they trust Mr. Trump when it comes to negotiating potential terms of a ceasefire?
No, absolutely not. The American government, unfortunately for the United States, has lost a massive amount of credibility as far as the Ukrainian government is concerned and as far as the Ukrainian public is concerned. And they simply don't trust the Americans and what the Americans say. From the Ukrainian point of view, America's relatively strong support to Ukraine in the early days of the war was a huge support that was that all citizens across the country were thankful for. And when the Trump administration reversed that, the Ukrainians saw that as betrayal. They understand that there is a political process in America, and they understand that Ukraine is not the United States' highest foreign policy priority. But that being said, the Ukrainians are in a war. They're fighting for freedom. They are up against an authoritarian dictator that is conducting a war of aggression. And in that context, they simply do not understand how America, the country that stands for freedom, could ever betray them like that from the Ukrainian point of view. So an announcement from the White House now is taken very skeptically in Ukraine. It might lead to something beneficial, but they're not going to hope for it.
Moving from politics into more practical matters, how would you say is the situation on the front line, especially when it comes to, for example, Pokrovsk? We've heard about a situation there. We've heard about the importance of that place, and through that prism, given the circumstance, how would you assess the Ukrainian defensive strategy as of recent?
Those are two big questions. Okay, the situation in Pokrovsk is the standard Ukrainian military term is it's critical but stable, and the Russians are making very small incremental advances in very narrow locations. The Ukrainians are counterattacking in a few places, but the general trend is extremely slow advance by the Russians. And by extremely slow, it means that in their advance towards Pokrovsk, they spent about 2 years advancing roughly 25 kilometers, losing in the process, nobody really knows, but really hundreds of thousands of men. From the fighting line now to Pokrovsk, it's probably another 10 to 15 kilometers, depending on the direction. So nobody is expecting a sudden collapse of Ukrainian defenses. And the soldiers I talked to, they all say, well, we're still here. We're still fighting. Yes, we're taking casualties, but we're inflicting way more. And so there's no expectation here that I'm seeing that suddenly it's going to fall apart. Regarding the Ukrainian strategy overall, it's really, they don't have many options. There's a general understanding that the Ukrainians see themselves in a position similar to the Afghans fighting the Americans, or the Soviets in their day, or the Vietnamese against the Americans. It's a long-term struggle where the Ukrainian objective is to keep fighting and to
And
wear
we
their
will
opponent out.
And we will definitely keep our fingers crossed for their fight. Thank you so much. Stefan Korshak, Senior Defense Correspondent at the Kyiv Post, was my guest. Thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me. Have a great day.
You too. And so this would be all for now here on World Talks. I'm Claudia Czerwińska. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope to see you back here in just a moment.